Hello and welcome to ORH Road Hatter, where I'm joined by Jamie Castle and Adam Driscoll as we look ahead to the visit of Swansea City this weekend. Jamie, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Firmly in December now. Don't know about you, but I'm in a job that gets pretty busy in December. Not because of work, but because of social. So yeah, we're firmly in what we call city season. But looking forward to Luton at the weekend.
And Adam, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good, thank you, mate. Just trying to move on from from the weekend, and obviously our chat about the Norwich game, and seeing what we can do this weekend if we can put anything maybe a little bit different and a bit of a better performance out of the bag, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully we get better than what we saw over the weekend. And as we've just mentioned, it's the visit of Swansea City, and we're going to get straight into that. But first, don't forget to check out the ORH Road Hatter merch on oakroadhatter.com. We've got plenty of different options for you, and it's coming up to Christmas, so it'll make the perfect present for that Luton fan in your life, or maybe even a Watford fan in your life if you really want to wind them up. But we'll get straight into things. And Adam, we've got Swansea coming to town, and unfortunately, it looks like it could be a tough task because they actually can defend, which for Swansea City is not something we've seen much in recent years. But yeah, talk to me about this defensive record away from home that you discovered today.
Yeah, doing a bit of research for today for the pod, obviously as a professional. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like obviously where they are in the table, I kind of liken them to that middle of the pack sort of Grand National horse that's just waiting for an opening and staying in the mix. So they're very much there at the moment. I think they're pretty much the same distance off of the playoffs as they are the relegation zone in terms of points. So they are well placed in that sense. But yeah, I mean their defensive record's really interesting, and they certainly look pretty solid and structured. They've conceded 17 goals in 18 games. There's only 6 teams that have conceded fewer, and I think bar Millwall, the rest of those are in the top 7 in the table. So, even in recent weeks, I think 7 of those 17 have been conceded in the last 3 games as well. So you take those away almost, and they've had a pretty solid start defensively. So I think they're going to be a hard team to, I think probably a hard team to break down. And yeah, we're going to need our forwards to be, in the game to give us any sort of chance of getting through that defence.
It's fair to say they aren't an exciting team at the moment, and I'm sure Swansea City fans would probably agree with me on that because whilst they have been very solid defensively, they've only scored 18 this season. That's 18 goals in 18 games. Not that we're much better on that front, but we do provide entertaining games for the neutral, having conceded 33 goals at this stage, which is just utterly ridiculous. Jamie, where do you think the threats come from in that Swansea team? Because they are a fairly unusual side in terms of Swansea teams of the past, which usually have those really well-known players, sort of cult heroes.
Yeah, I mean you say they're a pretty unexciting team. They've had 35 goals across their sort of conceded and 4 in the first 18 games this season. But the last 3 games have been what 2-2, 2-1, and 4-3. So it seems like they may have turned a corner in terms of letting goals in and scoring them themselves. Yeah, I think Swansea overall are a team that I wasn't too familiar with before sort of looking into, but I think delving in a bit of detail, they've probably got a pretty familiar defensive and midfield area, but a less than familiar forward line. I mean, I think names at the back, you've got Josh Key, who was Exeter, someone that I think we were linked with previously. Josh Timon, obviously at Stoke, probably would do a job for us at left centre back or left back as well. Harry Darling at Milton Keynes. I'm pretty sure there was this conspiracy that because he'd followed Luton Town about a year ago that we were going to sign him in the summer, and then Cabango, who I thought was younger to be honest, but he's been around he's been around for a while now. Sort of a Welsh prospect who's had some really good minutes at the Championship. Sort of moved forward to midfield. I think Matt Grimes, a Championship lifer, a very very good player. Josh Allen, clearly sort of one that's coming down in terms of his senior career now, sort of coming towards retirement. So I think that sort of block of players is probably a block of players that we're pretty familiar with, either as Luton fans or just generally across the board of football. But then it comes to that front four, I think Liam Cullen is someone that we're more familiar with. But then you got Miles Harris, who I know of from Wimbledon, but is fairly new to the level. And then you've got sort of two fairly unknowns in terms of Pereira and Popotnik, and yeah, two players that I'll be honest, that know very little about, are new to the league this year, and yeah, it's someone that I think will probably surprise a couple. I think Popotnik had a decent season at Bordeaux last year in Liga, and got the move to the Championship fairly young. But yeah, I think that forward line is going to be fairly unfamiliar, and in terms of threats, ultimately that they're all in the league for a reason. They're Swansea mid-table, and certainly doing better than us. So I definitely don't want to say anything negative towards their front line, but I think as Adam pointed out, I think defensively they're pretty solid, only considered 17 all season, and I think that back four just says it all. I think four very familiar players at this level, and I think Darling and Cabango combined as a pair is a very established sort of partnership at the back at this level for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that solid defence, and we haven't exactly been full of goals, I'll say, this season, particularly recently. Well, we did score 2 against Norwich. We only scored 1 against Hull, who are a pretty poor side. We only scored 1 against Cardiff. We only scored 1 against West Brom. So home games recently, we have not been productive at all, Adam. Why do you think that is, and what can change in this weekend's fixture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of things. It's the creativity in terms of getting the chances into the right players, and I think it's also the ability to control a game and like put your attacking intent on the game. And I think most of us would agree that probably bar the Watford game and certain parts of the Sunderland game, we've not really shown attacking intent. We've certainly not had the creativity, and we've not really shown the attacking intent at home that sort of says from the off, we're at home, we're going to play the way we want, we're going to be in control, and we're going to make chances and score. So I don't know necessarily that can change unless something does click. But it does need to, doesn't it? We do. We've spoken last week about how we're conceding a lorry load of goals. Maybe not at home, but we are conceding most games. So we certainly need to be thinking about how we can score, more than one, just so that it's easier to hold out games and ultimately come away with a win.
Jamie, does it concern you where our threat comes from when we're without Alfie? Because he's been with what we've missed him for the last, is it 4 games? 4 games, probably 3 games. And in terms of outlet, we've looked quite short of it, really.
I think concern is the wrong word. I think clearly we're a lot weaker going forwards without Alfie. I think that's fairly obvious. He's one of the best left wing backs in the league, or best wing backs in general in the league. But I wouldn't say I'm concerned. I think as much as this season we've not obviously been at the levels that we'd expect, you've still got some very, very good forward players. You've got obviously Morrison and Adebayo, who we all know what they can do together. I think Jacob Brown has shown some really good stuff this season. So we've definitely got enough in that forward line to be able to threaten, especially at home. And I think it almost works in our favour, the fact that Swansea are a side that generally, but bar the last 3 games, have been fairly low scoring and as you say, I won't say boring affairs, but games that have been decided by a goal. And as a team that at home, I think away from home, absolutely, we've been leaking goals and it's not been good enough. But at home, I think we've been fairly defensively strong, and I don't think we've conceded more than 1 goal for quite some time at home. So I think given that track record at home in particular, I think it's the game that sort of suits us, because it's the game that if it's going to be decided by a goal, I hope that we've got the players to be able to win that 1-0. Whereas if a team was coming to town having been scoring 2s and 3s and 4s for fun, then that's where I'd probably be more concerned, because if it got into a scoring battle, then we probably lose it. But if it's a 1-0 game, I think it's a game that we can definitely come out on the right side of, because yes, we're losing Alfie, and yes, Morris and Eli haven't been up to the level, but we all know that what they can do. And I think over the course of 90 minutes, if we can keep it tight at the back and just play the Luton way, I think we can probably come out the right side of it.
I mean, if I remember right, I think it was the last time we played Swansea away from home. Right at the start of the last championship season, where did Morris get his first goal
Yeah,
of
it
the
was 2-0,
season?
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that sort of really helping us to kick on a bit, because we've been stuttering up until that point. So I guess when you look at it as a potential game that we could kick on at home, and I think we need to, because we haven't been, whilst we have got results recently, we've been quite uninspiring at home, and that's when we really need to be lifting the fans, because it's obviously the home fans that get behind us week in, week out at those games at Kenilworth Road.
Yeah, and I was just looking at sort of the head-to-heads. I think other than the crazy 3-3 game at Luton back in, what was it, 2021, every game has been something to nil. It was 2-0 and 1-0 to us in that last season in the Championship. Season before that, went to them 1-1-0, and it was 3-3 at home. And then before that, it was 2-0 Swansea, 1-0 Luton, 1-0 Swansea. So it's been a game that's been, as I said, bar that 3-3 draw, it's been always been a team that's 1-0. So that obviously is decent signs. I think it's a team that we've had a decent track record against, and hopefully, as I say, I just hope that. I think the Norwich performance itself, as I said on the last pod, I thought the performance was okay. I think it was more than enough to get something from the game. I think had the game finished 2-2, we'd be happy. We'd say it's a good performance, and we'd look forward to the next game with a bit of confidence. So it turns out that there was two pretty, I wouldn't say disastrous, but bad defensive actions, just like the first two goals, which then meant we lost 4-2 and lost the game. It was a bit more negative, but let's just take the positives from that game against Norwich. I thought overall we did more than enough to get something from the game, and if we can carry that into a home game against Swansea, a Swansea side that have been a bit lacklustre going forwards, and if we can take that attacking display away at Norwich, I mean, look, we scored 2 goals against Norwich away from home. Okay, Norwich aren't the most defensively sound team, but we've gone there and we've looked pretty good and we've created chances. So if we can do the same at home at Kenilworth Road against a side that scores 1s and 0s away from home, I think then that's definitely a good springboard to go into the game and get 3 points.
So what you're saying there is it's a 4-4 on Saturday.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely not going to commit to that in the score prediction, but if it is 4-4, then well, I'm fin.
I mean, when you look at our attack, you mentioned there that Morris and Eli haven't really kicked on in terms of what we know they can do, but they still have 4 and 3 goals each. Then you've got Jacob Brown, who's got another 3 goals himself. So our forwards do seem to be starting to score, but it's taking some time. Can you see a change from the lineup we saw against Norwich?
I really don't know. Like, I know we try and predict an 11, don't we? Obviously what we think versus what we'd probably go for, but I don't even know what to think anymore. I'm genuinely don't know how we're going to shape up. But in terms of attackers and forwards, I don't necessarily think we're going to move too far away from Morris and Adebayo. And that may be shown by Jacob Brown playing sort of like right midfield on the weekend just gone. It seems like if we're going to facilitate him, then he's going to play in midfield. But I do like him as well. To be fair, I think the problem we've had though is that, like, again, bar the Watford game, we've not really seen those two working as a pair, and they've normally bounced off each other in good times. I know there's been times where like one's come in and the others sort of gone out of the team, but predominantly when we're flying and scoring goals and looking good attacking, it's because they are really thriving as a pair, and I just don't really think we've seen that other than the Watford game and parts of Sunderland. So we have to find a way that means we can get the best out of both of them playing together, because you know I'd still take those two over a lot of strikers in this league, but when they're both not in form, you're in a bit of a deep hole, and hoping for someone to pull you out of it, really.
I think on changes more generally, I think given Edwards' comments post Norwich, and I put it to him after the game that if you think players aren't playing up to the level that you think they should be playing, then make the changes. I think it seems like our view, and I think it's a view that probably shared by a lot of fans, that Chong and Mengi are the two in particular that probably weren't up to the level that he expected. Well, if you think that, make the change. I think if we stick in with the 4-4-2 type system with the fact that Doughty's out, then I think Moses probably comes in on the left. I would put Holmes or Burke if he's fit in place of Mengi. Midfield wise, I think I do like Baptiste. I'd love to see Baptiste get 90 minutes. I think it's been a bit frustrating that he's not been able to see the game out, whether he's purely not fit, or whether that's Edwards wanting to make a change and bringing on a Walsh or a Krause type player. It's a strange one. I think Clark himself has actually been improved in recent weeks, but then saying that, if you want to have a bit more of an aggressive midfielder and then a bit more of a playmaking one, then I think Baptiste is better than Clark, and then I want Krause in there as well. So do you drop Clark for Krause and then do Krause and Baptiste in that midfield two in a 4-4-2? And then quite right, I think if it is a 4-4-2 and you've got two up top, then it's got to be Morris and Eli, because I think you probably put Brown at right mids, and there's no one else you can really put in either of those wing positions other than Moses and Brown or Chong. And if you drop in Chong, then it's Moses and Brown, and then you got to play Morris and Eli up top. So I think the selection probably picks itself a little bit if you go down that system. If it's a 3-5-2, then yeah, I mean, I would like to see Bell at left wing back. I know there's a persistence on putting Bell as the left-footed centre half in the three, but I don't like Moses as a left wing back. Hashioka's our best right wing back at the minute, given injuries. Obviously, there's no Doughty. You don't play Chong there, so I'd like to see Bell push forward in that left wing back slot. So there are different combinations that you can see and things that you can do. Obviously, depends on whether he does a back three or a back four, but based on his comments post Norwich, I'd be surprised if there aren't some changes, because clearly it wasn't up to scratch. We all know it wasn't. That there was some performances that were definitely subpar, and I think it's now on Edwards to react and make those changes.
Yeah, you talk about Mengi and Chong there, and I just wanted to focus on Mengi in particular, because last season we saw how good he can be when he's when he's under pressure, because he was under pressure a lot last season. And it's not like that's changed this season, but he's actually playing against, I think most people will agree that the players he's playing against in the Championship aren't as good as the players he was playing against in the Premier League. And he was thriving at times despite results. He was coming out looking really, really good. This season, he just seems like a different player almost, Adam. And I think when you've got someone like Tom Holmes, who we brought in and then obviously allowed to stay at Reading, and he's finally come in, and then he looks in front of him and he's got all these players in front of him. But when he's had the opportunity, I thought he's looked very good. Would you bring in Holmes?
Yeah, I probably would, if I'm honest. And then you could do it. I think there's a case that you could do it for Mengi or for McGuinness or for Bell, like any of them, really. In truth, like there's nothing in our defensive record that says that anyone's entitled to play. But when Holmes has played, I've quite liked the look of him in terms of that fight and that physicality. Again, you wouldn't want him in a foot race, but he is someone that will put himself about. So certainly can't argue with that. Just on Mengi though, I mean, I know he played last season and played really well, and we were obviously backs to the wall and under pressure. But I feel like you know we signed him knowing that he's not going to be here for a long time, um, and I feel like there was an element of I'm in the shop window every single game last season for himself, because the Premier League is global and there's a lot of clubs that you know can just watch games very easily and scout. So yeah, I do feel like it was an opportunity for him to say, right, I'm just gonna absolutely bust the gut and do everything I can and hopefully be a Premier League footballer next season or get that European move. And yeah, there was a lot of talk late in the window about, I think it was Torino or someone like that. That move didn't happen. And I think we're seeing the impact of that now. I think we've got a player that doesn't really want to be here. I'm not saying he lacks effort, but I think he knows at some point he will not be around. And yeah, I just think he didn't necessarily anticipate, still being a Luton player after relegation, and we're probably seeing the impact of that. And yeah, it's never nice, is it? I mean, we recruited a lot of good players when we went up to the Prem. When I say good players, I mean good for this Championship level. A lot of them must have known there was a high probability of us coming back down, and you'd think that we'd done our kind of our research in attitudes and mentality and being able to keep those players happy and committed. But I think with certain players that we've mentioned already, I don't think they are committed. Um, and I think unfortunately Mengi probably falls into that bracket. Still possesses unbelievable talent, clearly. So it's very hard to say we don't want to see him, but there's certainly something not right when it comes to that kind of that desire to play for Luton this season, I think.
Yeah, I think Mengi for me is the epitome of our issues this season. You've got a player there who is excellent. I think his ability is excellent. He's definitely a Premier League level centre half when he's at his best and fighting for sort of a team that he wants to play for. I think it's on the face of it a pretty bad example, but I just think back to that 6-2 City defeat where he was man marking Erling Haaland, and okay, he scored 5 goals in the end, but he was really really aggressive against Erling Haaland on the halfway line, and I think won 80-90%, 18 to 90% of his duels against Haaland. And okay, Haaland scored 5, but I'd say 2 or 3 of those were Tim Krul mistakes. The other 2 were just you got 3 in the box. And I think overall, none of Haaland's 5 goals were Mengi's fault. And what I really liked about that game was where he was super aggressive and he didn't care who was in front of him. He didn't care that it was Erling Haaland. It didn't matter. He was just really aggressive and athletically he was an absolute match for Erling Haaland. But now if you fast forward what is probably 8, 9, 10 months, I think that was like the game was in January, like fast forward 8, 9, 10 months, he's just a shadow of himself. And I think if all of our players played to the level that we know that they can do, if they were playing to the level that they did in the Prem last year, we wouldn't be in this position whatsoever. So yeah, again, A, it's frustrating because we know we can be better than we are, but B, if we could take some positives, if something just clicks and something changes, then we've definitely got a lot more room to push up the table. So yeah, putting it on Mengi and loads of other players in particular that have so much more to give. If that mindset just changes, then we wouldn't be in this position. Hopefully, we can kick on. But yeah, I think that's what makes it a tough choice for Edward, because he thinks, well, that Teddy Mengi is Teddy Mengi. We've seen what he can do based on the players I have in front of me. If you were to pick three centre backs, sort of use the assumption that all centre backs would be on their A game, Teddy Mengi would be number one. He'd be the first centre half you pick, because if all of our 6-7 centre backs were on their absolute best, Mengi would be number one. But then you're like, well, actually, well, he's not been. He's been out of form for a while. He's not been at his best. And then is it a time to change it? So I have sympathy for Edwards. It's a tough call to make, but probably it's a time where you probably make the change because he's just not been at the level that we expect.
We're going to talk a bit more about the Luton clash with Swansea after a quick break. Plus, we'll also be making some score predictions. But before that, don't forget to check out Oak Road Hatter on our social media accounts. So that's on Twitter or X, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. That's Oak Road Hatter, and you should be able to find us. But we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to Oak Road Hatter, where I'm still joined by Jamie and Adam. And before we carry on, don't forget to check out our merch on oakroadhatter.com. As I mentioned before, there's plenty of great stuff to pick up, and everything you buy helps put some money towards Luton Food Bank. But we're going to go back into things, and we're going to talk a bit more about the midfield, because last season we had Ross Barkley in midfield, and in fairness, you can't compare our current midfield to Ross Barkley, but what he did brilliantly for the vast majority of the season was picking the ball up from the defence and driving forward. This season, we really are lacking someone, in my opinion, and I know a few other people agree, that is going to do the same, that's going to pick that ball up from defence and really move it forwards, Adam. Can you see that being an issue going forward? And can you see that being an issue we've had so far this season?
Yeah, definitely. I was actually just thinking when you were saying about that ball carrying midfielder, who was the last one we had, and yet behind me is the man written on the wall. So Barkley certainly fell into that category. I think before that, I think Jordan Clark does it sometimes, but I mean, the one that stands out for me in my head is Dewsbury Hall. Like, I know we didn't see much of him because it was lockdown and whatever, but I was lucky enough to get into the home games that we were allowed in and watched him, and he was, a brilliant, brilliant ball carrier, um, and drove us up the pitch. So certainly him sticks in the mind, and obviously the magic man of Ross Barkley last season was just, yeah, I mean, best Luton player I've ever seen in 25, nearly 30 years. So yeah, it's very hard to replace someone like that, but equally you should be able to know what you need, even dropping down. You know, all right, what type of player is Barkley? What can we get that replaces as many of those attributes as possible? And on the subject of what we've got now, I don't really think we have a ball carrier. Um, Certainly not someone that's really doing it. If they are capable, like then they're not showing it. So I think the guy coming in January, Darbo, from what I've seen, looks a bit like that. He seems to be like really a kind of a driving midfielder. There's lots of YouTube, clips where he's driving with the ball. And I think he was, his last game, he had 3 assists in this last game for AIK. So yeah, he potentially could be that. Um, but then you are pinning those sort of hopes and hopes of those qualities on a young lad as well. So it's certainly something I'd be looking at in the January window, trying to replace or trying to get someone with those sort of attributes. And yeah, we spoke the other night, about the January window and what potentially is needed. And that's probably the first thing I'd be looking at, like a proper midfielder that can, yeah, grab us by the scruff of the neck, as I think Jamie phrased it the other night, and just try and turn our season around really with a bit of intent.
Jamie, do you think Shandon Baptiste is the sort of player that could do that if we could find form?
No, I do. I think for me, the midfield issues isn't personnel, it's composition of the midfield tactically. I think, yes, you've based the system this year on a midfield two when it was Ross Barkley and we're forgetting Sambi Lukonga, by the way. I thought when Sambi came in, excellent. He's Premier League level. He's now at Sevilla, which I think speaks volumes in terms of his ability. So I agree. Ross Barkley was one of the best players we've had in a Luton shirt, certainly in my lifetime. But I think let's admit that Sambi Lukonga was up there as well. So you're basing your midfield two now on those two players when clearly we've not got anyone in our squad that are anywhere near those two. So I think changing the midfield composition for me is super important. And I think that's been probably one of my main concerns tactically of us is no matter there's been lots of talk of 4 at the back, 3 at the back, 5 at the back, do you 2 up top, 1 up top, but I think we're missing this whole 2 midfield, 3 midfield conversation. I think, Adam, you want to point out, I think Jordan Clark can carry the ball. I think technically, I think Baptiste we've not seen enough of. I think Baptiste can definitely be that level in terms of Ross Barkley technical ability. I think Baptiste for me was the Simon Lukonga replacement, but I think technically he's up there. I outside of that, Jordan Clark is the man technically. I think we were all surprised by his ability. I think ultimately, he's a right mid, right winger, so he's got that level of attacking ability. But he's now playing in the central midfield. I think he's got that ability as Barkley had to really pick up the ball and drive from deep. But he's not going to do it at the consistent level that Barkley did. So you're going to need to you're going to need to give him the protection around him to give him the ability to push forward and just really take liabilities, drive the ball. If he loses it, then so what? You've got two midfielders around him and behind him to try and try and pick up the loose ball. Whereas right now you're sort of Jordan Clark in the middle. You think, if I push forward and try and carry the ball through the midfield lines, if I lose it, then I've got Nakamba or Kraus or Baptiste, whoever my partner is, they're 1v2 against or 1v3 against it sometimes against their midfield. So I think that for me is been the primary issue for me this season. I don't agree that the midfield two has been persisted with, no matter what the sort of the formation around them has been. So I get Adam's view on recruitment in midfield, but we've got Clark, Baptiste, Kraus, Nakamba, Darbo in January. You got Pelly. You got Nelson can play there. We've got numbers. I think if you add another number there, then it just pushes someone else down the pecking order. For me, it's just really sort of reworking that conversation, that composition in midfield, because I think the way it's going at the minute, it just isn't working. I think adding an extra body in midfield, I'm not sure where you take that body from, whether you take the body from defence, or if you take it from the two up top and bring someone in. But that's a much longer debate. But I think adding an extra body is something we need to do, because I think a lot of complaints this season has been about how easy it has been to play through us, and I think it's hard to argue that the reason that we've been easy to play through is because we've had two in midfield.
I think you could also say the same about defence though, right? Like when everyone's fit and on paper we've got a load of good centre halves, but ultimately when they're not performing and the window does open, like, you know, surely the thing to do is to freshen it up a bit. And then we've gone through all of our midfield options and when they're fit and stuff. But you know, I think it's probably a January window where maybe Pelly goes, and we know we've got one coming in for Pelly. Are there any other midfielders that could potentially move on that would allow us space to bring, you know, someone else in? Like, do we see anyone else in midfield moving on?
No, because you got Nakamba, who at some point maybe in the summer moves on, but he's not going to move on in January. I think he's too important at the minute in terms of that midfield battler. Kraus is on loan and would love to make permanent, so he definitely doesn't move in. It's hard to move on Walsh when you sign him in the summer. Baptiste, I think, again, probably up there with quality of midfielder. Pelly, I think you rightly point out, obviously sad to hear from a romantic perspective. Clearly, what he's given us through his career, but Pelly is probably the only real one that I think is reasonable to state that he could move on in January. So I think if you're saying one in, one out with Darbo for Pelly, there just isn't enough room in that midfield to bring in another body, especially if you stick with a midfield two. Okay, maybe if you bring in and go to a midfield three, then fine, you can have 7 or 8 midfielders for a midfield three. But if you've got 7 or 8 midfielders for midfield two, then that's difficult to keep everyone happy. And I don't think anyone's going to sign for us on the basis that they're going to be one of 7 or 8 midfielders fighting for two positions. So yeah, it's a really tough position to try and analyse, but there's not an awful lot of bodies that we can move out for me.
I just wanted to go back to what we were saying, because Jamie, you said there about what changes to bring the extra man into midfield. I think that goes back to what we said earlier when we said about Chong being potentially one of those players Edwards was referring to, sort of being on the last straw in terms of not giving enough this season, ability or performance. Do you think him not playing would potentially make us revert to a midfield three?
Yeah, I think for me that is it. I think if obviously we played a 4-4-2 at the weekend, I think dropping Chong and bringing in a midfielder, pushing Brown up in the front three. I think that is probably the change you make, and is have more structure in the middle. You can still have the width in the 4-3-3. I think you probably play Eli as the one that's a bit wide of Morris, and then Brown on the right. Not obviously not ideal, but again you've got depth there. You can bring Chong back in the left wing if you need be. I think that is the change. I think a 4-3-3 is probably it, because then you can have Clark and Krause ahead of Baptiste. Let's say you can maybe play Baptiste in the hole. He's got the vision. He's probably got the experience to be able to sort of to dictate from that deeper position. Then you got Clark and Krause as the eights that are being the really aggressive pressing on the front foot eights that almost make it a front five at times if you sort of going against a back five or a back four in a DM. So I think that probably is the change that I would like to see made. Other than that, I don't really know where else you can pull a player from. Again, you can probably say that front two pair you mentioned earlier, Morris and Eli, haven't been quite up to their best as not only individually but as a pair. Right, they've not been up to the level that we know that they can reach. So maybe you can drop one for midfielder, but then you're sticking one up top. We've not been that great going forward. So then, do you want to really take a centre forward off? That's going to make us, in theory, worse going forward. So, yeah, I would really like to see that 4-3-3. I think that could really give us some cover for like a Jordan Clark, where he can pick the ball up and really drive forwards, but also not lose too much going forwards or defensively. I think a back four has shown. I think the back four at the weekend, albeit we conceded 4 goals, I think structurally and tactically was okay. It was just more the mistakes that were made. So if we can cut out the mistakes, I think tactically the 4 was okay.
And changes brings me to the next thing, because we had a question from Ven Venables, which I presume isn't your real name, but we'll go with it. He said, should we be giving younger players a chance while our best 11 are off their game? And the player in particular I wanted to ask about was someone we spoke briefly about after the Norwich game, and that's Zach Nelson. Because if, for example, Chong was to be dropped out the side, he is certainly a player that could come in and offer something both in the midfield and out wide, Adam.
Yeah, I think he is. I don't really know what position he is yet. I think he's not a centre midfielder, and so I think if you are going to bring him in, then you're talking about, is he playing in the hole, with behind sort of Morris and Adebayo, or are you going to that 3 up front and you're playing him like wide right, for example? I certainly wouldn't be against it, and like, I do appreciate we have to get points on the board, but we're not doing that with some of our so-called established players. So at some point, you look at it; they've clearly put their trust and their faith in him previously, and he has done well. So the only way he's going to really learn and grow and develop is by playing. So I'd certainly, as a minimum, like to see him on the bench. And if that does mean that he can get some cameos and some minutes over the next sort of few weeks, then I'd definitely be in favour of that. I think maybe it probably would be a bit like, I think it would be a bit harsh to chuck him in, considering you've frozen him out for the last sort of like 3 months. I don't know that's going to benefit anybody, but I think certainly reintegrating him is an absolute no brainer. And yeah, you start to bring him back into the fold and tell some of those senior players that they're just not good enough. So yeah, that's my thought on it. I think particularly with Zach Nelson.
And in the long run, Jamie, having someone like Nelson come in and really establish himself within the squad can only benefit Luton as a club.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at forward investment, again, don't want to get into the accounting treatment that some of the Premier League clubs have, but if he was to come in and play a good season and get sold on for £5 or so £1 million, and that's pure profit, right? So really important to invest into the academy. It's not just him. We've got Joe Johnson. I think there was some lad that's scored 6 and assisted 5 in a 13-2 win for the 21s this week. So he's someone I'd certainly be dragging into training, because if he can contribute 11 goals in the game at that level, okay, it's different beast, and I say it a bit in jest, but he's clearly got that ability, and it's worth investing in our our young players, because that's just pure profit to the bottom line, and helps sort of future investment into more signings going forward. So yeah, I think in terms of the short term and this season, speaking, I think bluntly, it probably is just Nelson and Joe Johnson are the only real two that can impact. I think there's been talk of sort of PSL, I know, is out on loan now. I think you got Francis Clark in that as well. So there are players in and around it that in the future could prove promising and could prove really sort of beneficial to our first 11. But I think Nelson and Johnson are the two. I think Joe Johnson, it's tough. I think if you set your expectations right, then he's someone that I think we can definitely look to. Clearly, he's not an Alfie Doughty, not yet anyway. If he's someone that you want to take some of the load off Alfie Doughty and sort of manage the minutes and give him 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, then I think absolutely he's someone that I would absolutely love to see integrated into the sort of the 18-man match day squads. But if you expect him to be Alfie Doughty, then well, sorry, he's just going to disappoint you because he's not Alfie Doughty just yet. So that, I think that's something to bear in mind. And then on Nelson, yeah, I think I agree. He's not a central midfielder. I think in his academy sort of days, he's largely been a number 10, sort of largely an attacking midfielder. I think from what I've seen of him at senior level, I really like the way he can beat a man one-on-one, and I think that for me, I think that bodes well as a more of like a wide forward. I think you see it quite a bit in terms of central players maybe being put out wide early on in their sort of senior career, just because it's a lot less congested in those areas. I think it's okay for someone with a technical ability to beat one or two men at 21's level, because you're playing against a much broader range of technical skill and ability at that level. Whereas if you hit the senior level, you all know that players are of a quality to have made it. So I would like to see him maybe being taken out of that congested area and being played out wide. I like the idea of him playing maybe right or left of a front three. If you sort of have Nelson and Brown as the wide players, and then Morris or Wheeler up top, that seems fairly exciting, and I think it'd be something that I'd like to see at some point. So yeah, I think Nelson is probably the one that's more likely to impact the 11. Johnson, I think certainly in the 18 I'd like to see, but other than that, I don't really think there's probably too much else.
I just wanted to pick up very quickly on the 13-2 win for the 21s, and the guy who scored 6 and assisted 5, I've just found out, is called Joshua Phillips. And I thought, interestingly, on the website it says that he's an explosive winger who is capable of playing in a variety of positions, including defence. So this guy does everything. So
Right wing back.
Yeah, we can stick him absolutely anywhere potentially in future, and yeah, you never know, things might turn around.
Okay, maybe we need to bring in this Joshua Phillips and get him into that first team sooner rather than later.
I think he's come in on the wrong season. I'm sure he would have got into a back three last year in the Prem.
Well, based on the injuries we had last year, we actually could have seen him anywhere. He would have been quite a useful player last season. But we're gonna go back to the Swansea preview, and we're just gonna get some score predictions before we finish. So I don't think anyone's going to be predicting this 4-4 unless Joshua Phillips starts up front for both teams. Jamie, or in goal. I'm gonna come to you first.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with what I said earlier. I think it'll be a very tight game. I think it's not going to be one to get you up out your seat, but I think that's not the sort of game that we need right now. We need a game where we just basically get 3 points right. So our record home has been strong. Obviously, last 2 games have been 1-0 wins, and I can't see too much different here. So yeah, I'm gonna stay positive. I saw enough in the Norwich performance to give me some positivity going into this home game, and what is a big next 4, right? Sort of the next 4, 3 at home, and if we can replicate this result in those next 3 home games, and I think we'll be in a much more relief position. So yeah, I'm going to go 1-0 Luton. Don't know who to score. It could be a pick of your bunch, probably a Morris penalty. But now I think another well-needed clean sheet for that defensive confidence as well.
Yeah, I also think we're going to keep a clean sheet, but I can see us scoring more than one goal at home, hopefully, and maybe finally. So I'm going to go for 2-0. So I'm going to really push the boat out. I also think Morris will get a goal. I'm not sure if it'll be a penalty or not, but I do think he'll be on the score sheet. I couldn't tell you who the other goal scorer is going to be. But Adam, I'm going to come to you.
Josh Phillips.
Yeah, Josh Phillips. Yeah. Sign him up. Get him in. I admire your optimism in us scoring 2 goals. So fair play if that does happen. I think based on the history of the fixture being very tight and neither club really firing. I think both clubs are sort of like a goal a game on average so far. I'm gonna predict a clean sheet, but I'm gonna predict it for both teams. I think it's gonna be a very uninspiring 0-0. So anyone listening, watching, maybe just stay in the pub and you might enjoy yourself a little bit more than the way I'm bigging this up, basically.
I was going to say, I was just going to promote, I've got a spare ticket for the weekend, but we've obviously sold it very well. So I guess that spare ticket's going to remain spare. So stay at home, lads.
Yeah.
That's all from us, but we'd love to know your thoughts on everything we've spoken about in today's episode, including your score predictions. So let us know on social media. That's at Oak Road Hatter on Twitter or X, Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky. And we would try to talk about any of your points you've made on particularly the young players, I'm assuming, in the next episode. But from myself, from Jamie, and from Adam, thank you very much for listening.